I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. Catholic dioceses and organizations take a huge step to oppose the HHS mandate. We'll get a breakdown of the massive lawsuit. Plus, where do our laws come from? A couple of experts weigh in.
Don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, don't commit adultery, and so forth are decisively, it seems to me, the work of reason.
And men and women from across Brooklyn and Queens give back to their parishes.
They pray, they serve together, they love one another. The lay pastoral leaders are an essential part of allowing parishes to do what they do best.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The controversial contraception mandate. Catholics have objected to the Obamacare measure since August 1st, 2011, when the rule requiring that some religious organizations cover contraceptives and sterilization in their health plans was announced. Now, a narrow exemption or maybe some grandfathered health care plans proposed this year does exclude some religious organizations. However, as Cardinal Timothy Dolan explained on CBS this morning, the limited scope of the exemption is at the heart of the problem.
The exemption given to the churches is so strangling and is so narrow, and it's also presumptuous in that a bureau of the federal government is attempting to define for the church the extent of its ministry and ministers. It's that exemption, it's the straight-jacketing, handcuffing exemption, characteristic of that exemption, Charlie and Erica, that we find to be very dangerous.
And with that, the battle for the preservation of religious freedom rages on. Yesterday, 43 Catholic institutions, including dioceses, schools, hospitals, and social service agencies, filed suit in federal court to stop 3 government agencies from implementing the mandate. So why take this fight to court? And what could this mean for the viability of President Obama's health care plan going forward? Well, for answers to these and others key questions, I spoke to Hannah Smith. She's senior counsel at the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. Hannah's firm knows firsthand what lawsuits filed against the government and its HHS mandate entail. She explained to me earlier today. A blockbuster lawsuit filed yesterday, Hannah. Catholic bishops, religious institutions, Catholic universities taking their grievances to federal courts across the country to defend religious liberty. Is this a sign that negotiations with the government are at an impasse right now?
Well, I think there was a statement issued yesterday by the USCCB to the effect that they have tried to negotiate with the administration. They have tried legislative means. And this is the final resort to ask the court to uphold religious freedom and to strike down this unconstitutional mandate. So I think other avenues have been tried, but ultimately have proven unsuccessful.
And I do have a portion of that statement with me here, Hannah. Catholic bishops, including Cardinal Dolan, saying that, yes, despite repeated requests from church leaders, the government has insisted that it will not change the core principle of the U.S. government mandate. Now, proponents of the bill argue that eliminating that individual mandate will immediately expose the plan as unworkable. Now, do you agree that that would really be the case, and does that even matter in this case?
Well, certainly the HHS mandate that we're talking about, the mandate that requires all group health plans to cover contraception, sterilization, and abortifacient drugs, is morally abhorrent to many religious people. And it is part of the Affordable Care Act, which, provided that the Department of Health and Human Services should come up with a list of preventive services that were required to be covered under the Affordable Care Act. The Department of Health and Human Services asked the Institute of Medicine to come up with a list. They convened a panel of experts, many of whom were from the pro-choice agenda, and they came up with this list. Many of those services on it are completely unobjectionable, gestational diabetes screenings, et cetera. But it's, of course, the contraception and the abortion-inducing drugs and the sterilization that have caused such an uproar. With respect to the individual mandate case that's currently pending before the Supreme Court, if the court were to decide that the individual mandates were unconstitutional, it would then have to decide whether or not the individual mandate is severable from the rest of the health care law. And if it decides that the individual mandate is severable, then our cases would continue. But if it decides that the individual mandate is such a core piece of the Affordable Care Act legislation, then it could ultimately decide that the whole Affordable Care Act must be found unconstitutional as well. And then our lawsuits would go away because the Affordable Care Act would be struck down in toto.
All right, so right now it's in the hands of the courts. Now we have 12 lawsuits filed simultaneously yesterday in various U.S. district courts around the country. From your perspective as an attorney, how long does it take to get this many people, this many organizations on the same page, acting in what appears to be quite precise solidarity? I understand that each of the lawsuits uses very similar wording to make the case.
Well, all of our legal claims are very similar. The Becket Fund's lawsuit was first last fall in November, and our complaints have been out there for a long time. I think that the legal challenges are all centered on the First Amendment and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the Administrative Procedures Act. So to the extent that, there are similar claims, we are grateful that all of these different institutions are following the lead of the Becket Fund in our original lawsuit, and we're hoping that the courts will see that this is ultimately an unconstitutional and unlawful mandate.
And Hannah, in the time that we have left, I really want to ask you about this. The lawsuits include a very specific comment. Founding fathers agreed that the mixture of government and religion is destructive to both institutions and divisive to the social fabric upon which the country depends. Now, the lawsuits contend that the U.S. Constitution and federal law stand as bulwarks against oppressive government actions, even if supported by a majority of citizens. Now, what do you say to those who argue, as a democracy, the support by a majority of citizens is just and ultimately what the Founding Fathers actually intended?
Well, first of all, I would dispute that there is actually a majority of Americans who agree with this mandate. Recent polling actually shows that both men and women believe that religious institutions should not be forced to pay for drugs and services that violate their religious conscience. So I would dispute the factual basis for that assertion, that there is actually a majority that agrees with this mandate. I think actually the evidence is contrary. I think the evidence throughout time has shown that the pro-abortion and agenda has sought to impose these kinds of mandates through various means, whether through congressional legislation or other means, and now they've just tried to do it through regulation, through the HHS regulation process. And of course, the First Amendment does stand as a bulwark against government coercion and oppression. So even if it were the case that a majority of Americans believed that this contraceptive mandate was appropriate, the First Amendment stands as the last refuge to protect those who have religious freedom rights in this country.
All right, Hannah, fair enough, and thank you, and that is the final word. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll probably be speaking with you again in the future, depending on how far these cases go. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and go to becketfund.org and check out our website. We have a great resource page there on all of the lawsuits that are currently pending.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Now, according to a Knights of Columbus Marist poll released today, nearly 3 in 4 Americans, that's 74 to 26%, say that freedom of religion should be protected even if it conflicts with other laws. According to the poll, most Americans would also protect the First Amendment conscience rights of hospitals, healthcare workers, and insurers. Well, stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. Georgetown may face a church lawsuit from one of its more prominent alumni. We'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines coming up next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faublas. While dioceses and Catholic organizations are taking their case against the federal contraception mandate to federal court, one popular author is preparing a canon lawsuit against a top Catholic college. William Peter Blatty, author of The Exorcist, is preparing a case against Georgetown University over what he says is the school's failure to live up to its Catholic identity. Blatty, a Georgetown alumnus, says the school scandals are, quote, too many to count and too many to ignore. Blatty says the invitation to Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius was the last straw. Sebelius was one of the driving forces behind the federal contraception mandate. Blatty, a Brooklyn native and graduate of Brooklyn Prep, is filing his case through the church's legal system, seeking penalties up to and including removal of Georgetown's right to call itself Catholic. The Archbishop of Los Angeles says the current debate over marriage ignores the needs of children. Writing in his weekly Archdiocesan newspaper column, Archbishop Jose Gomez says that every society in every age has always understood marriage as the lifelong union of one man and one woman. Gomez notes that marriage is for the benefit of husband and wife and for the creation and education of children. The Archbishop also writes that birth control and reproductive technologies have cut the natural ties between the marital act and the procreation of children. Gomez says children have a right to grow up with the mother and the father who gave them life, and says Catholics have a duty to promote and defend that right. The Archdiocese of Philadelphia has declared 2 more priests unfit for ministry. The Archdiocese says it substantiated a claim against one of the priests who had not been allowed to minister since May of 2010, when an allegation first came to the attention of the church. The priest has agreed to a supervised life of prayer and penance. Meanwhile, the second priest came forward in December of last year and admitted to having abused a minor. Since that time, he has not been permitted to exercise public ministry. But there are still signs of the deadly tornado that ripped through Joplin, Missouri 1 year ago. But as we hear from reporter Mary Ellen Hopkins, the city is counting its blessings.
The powerful tornado, packing winds of more than 200 miles an hour, destroyed some 7,500 buildings. It leveled homes, businesses, and schools, and took the lives of 161 people. The twister claimed St. Mary's Catholic Church, but left the cross. Father Justin Monahan says he entered into high-speed prayer while taking shelter in the bathroom. He emerged from the rubble to see the enduring cross.
I just looked and I thought, wow, God is really with us, and He's letting us know He's going to take care of us.
About a mile to the west, Joplin High School. This is surveillance video taken as the twister hit. Now a massive pile of rubble is all that's left. The school operated out of a mall this school year. President Obama traveled to Joplin on Monday to deliver the commencement address to graduating seniors.
You're from Joplin, so you'll always know that it's always possible for a community to come together when it matters most.
Joplin's mayor says the city is slowly getting back on its feet.
A year later, Joplin is on the mend. We're on the build, and we're doing good, but we're going to do better. We have a long road to travel, but the way that everybody is joining together and unifying and chipping in, we're going to make it.
And that report from Mary Ellen Hopkins. Well, it may just be a matter of trading spaces. Crystal Cathedral Ministries, whose iconic building was purchased by a Catholic diocese earlier this year, is considering moving to a Catholic church in that diocese. The ministry, which is affiliated with the Reformed Church in America, filed for bankruptcy earlier this year and sold its building to the Diocese of Orange, California. The diocese will use Crystal Cathedral as its new cathedral. The Christian Post reports Crystal Cathedral Ministries is considering moving only blocks from its current location to a Catholic church. The Orange Diocese would allow the Protestant ministry to use the church rent-free for 1 year and then charge $25,000 a month after that. It's 140 characters or less, yet it is still too much for the Pakistani government. On Sunday, Pakistan banned Twitter for 12 hours. According to a Pakistani official, the ban was instituted because of blasphemous materials. According to Reuters, the government did not specify who or what prompted the action. The country is known for its strict laws against blasphemy. Those found guilty of violating the rules get the death penalty. Last year, 2 government ministers, including a Catholic, were assassinated for speaking out against those laws. The show goes on for Lady Gaga in the Philippines despite calls from Catholic bishops for her concerts to be canceled. One bishop said that Lady Gaga's attitude, quote, seems to promote godlessness. He said Christians need to exercise self-censorship to avoid shows that are harmful to their faith. According to one report, the concerts in the Philippines took place with Lady Gaga simulating sex acts, using expletives, and, quote, gunning down people on stage. A concert set to take place next month in Indonesia has already been canceled over concerns about security. He was Pope during some times of change, and students in Rome will get the chance to learn more about him. Rome Reports has more on that.
There's no better place for students to learn than a university. And with this in mind, a Catholic school in Rome is adding a new curriculum to its list. Starting in the month of October, the Libera Università Maria Santissima Assunta will take on courses that focus on the teachings of Pope Paul VI.
Aveva He was interested in people's formation. Of course, that included forming one's conscience, religious formation, but it also encompassed civil responsibility. What we have in mind above everything else are young researchers, not only in Italy, but also an international level. There are so many students that research the history of Christianity and that of the Catholic Church.
Paul VI served as Pope from 1964 to 1978. There was a lot going on at that time, everything from the Second Vatican Council to the war in Vietnam. And these speakers say he was able to balance tradition with modern times. Even though the curriculum hasn't been officially launched just yet, the university is already planning on taking it abroad. In August, the Catholic University of Nairobi in Africa will hold a 2-day program on the teachings of Paul VI.
And finally tonight, the average age of new priests in the U.S. is getting younger. A new survey of men who have or will be ordained to the priesthood in the U.S. this year shows the average age is now 32, with 2/3 of the class between the ages of 25 and 34. According to the U.S. Bishops' Conference, the numbers are slightly younger than a year ago and continue a trend from the past 6 years. The survey, conducted by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, showed 6% of respondents only became Catholic later in life. 71% identify as Caucasian, Hispanics, Latinos made up 15%, and Asian or Pacific Islanders made up about 9%. About 63% of this year's ordination classes took part in the survey. 6 men will be ordained for the Diocese of Brooklyn in late June. Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. Coming up, where our laws originate and where they're headed.
Matters of natural law are also in line with the will of God and the law of God. And Revelation supports and illuminates a principle like the radical equality and the fundamental dignity of the human being.
Welcome back. Well, you've heard it all before. Don't steal, murder, go above the speed limit, or run a red light. And most people would agree that we need all of these laws. But not everyone would agree on why we have them. Does the government decide what's right and wrong? And is it up to each individual to decide for himself? Or are rules and regulations steeped in something more permanent? These questions are at the heart of the current legal battles over the federal contraception mandate. The Crossroads Cultural Center, which was established by members of the Catholic movement Communion and Liberation, wanted to explore the origin of law. At an event earlier this month at New York University, the center hosted a couple of experts who shared their insights.
Why do people obey the rules of law? Why do we obey at all? There is something prior to law. There is something that law has to respect.
One of the reasons so many people were here, I think they're intrigued by the idea of natural law. People recognize that there is a crisis in society, that we lack a common understanding of what the basis for our legal decisions should be.
Don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, don't commit adultery, and so forth, or don't hit your sister, are decisively, it seems to me, the work of reason.
Whether you believe in God or not, you can accept the reality that we are free, rational, and social beings, and having that nature, we are capable of understanding what is required of us in our relationship with others.
As a believing Christian, I also believe that these matters of natural law are also in line with the will of God and the law of God. And Revelation supports and illuminates a principle like the radical equality and the fundamental dignity of the human being.
Professor Robert George is one of the leading experts on natural law, a law professor at Princeton. Professor Simoncini is from the University of Florence and a visiting professor at Notre Dame. And he brings to the issue a very deep understanding of the history of law in Western civilization in the U.S. and in Europe.
We are losing our rooting of the legal system within our human experience. And so we are creating something that is artificial through the law. So we have to come back to a more realistic approach to this field.
I think that the two perspectives were very, very different. I think one was speaking sort of as a lawyer or a moral theorist, and the other was speaking really about sort of what humanity's experience has to add. And so I definitely got two completely new perspectives and a lot of food for thought.
I agree with the late Pope John Paul II, who in his encyclical Faith and Reason began with the following sentence: "Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit ascends to contemplation of the truth." Faith and reason with respect to basic human dignity, natural rights, the fundamental right to life, come together to support these principles of morality, which should also be made principles of our law.
Stay tuned, there's more Currents ahead. When we return, people from across the Brooklyn Diocese taking a greater role in their parishes.
These people, their life is all about service. It's inspiring to me, it's inspiring to anybody who really gets to know them.
Welcome back. 487 men in the U.S. are being ordained to the priesthood this year. As we heard earlier, the ordination classes have gotten younger and younger over the last 6 years. And despite the encouraging numbers, the church still needs lay people, ordinary men and women, in order to fulfill its mission in the world. The Brooklyn Diocese recognizes this and since 2001 has offered a training program to prepare lay leaders to serve at their parishes in new ways. Last night at the Immaculate Conception Center in Douglaston, Queens, Auxiliary Bishop Frank Caggiano led a liturgy and ceremony where the men and women were commissioned for their new roles.
You, my sisters and brothers, have for 3 years generously come to be formed more and more into the image of Christ, who came not to be served, but to serve.
Tonight we are happy to welcome 64 individuals who have completed 3 years of study in the lay ministry program with the goal of becoming commissioned lay pastoral leaders for service in the parishes, where they will be put to good use as leaders of various ministries.
Oh my gosh, without our lay pastoral leaders, our diocese would not possibly be able to do all of the ministries and services that we provide. I mean, in the end, the heart of our diocese is in our parishes. That's where the church is alive and where the people can encounter, in their faith, they pray, they serve together, they love one another. The lay pastoral leaders are an essential part of allowing parishes to do what they do best. You have studied, but more than that, you have given over everything about you to allow, like a piece of clay, to allow yourself to be molded. And it was not always easy. And yet, because of your generosity, because of your fidelity, because of the love you have for the Lord, you have come to this point.
They're called by their faith. They're called by others. This program has just whet their appetites for more and more knowledge. And someone has recognized them as a person who could be a leader in the parish. And they're asked to come forward.
Being part of this program has deepened my faith. It's something that you learn a little bit about theology. You meet other people. You see other parishes. You're around the diocese, but you're also learning. You're learning about Vatican II. You're learning what a lay minister should be, and really gearing yourself up to be able to lead people, both in their parish and through our church.
You learn so much that it opens up your insight to what Jesus is all about, and your relationship just becomes enormous. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Well, these gifts that were always there but have been brought out, I hope to continue to serve others, knowing when to lead and when to be led.
Through our education and through the divine intervention of the Holy Spirit, who has brought us to this point, that He will help us to be able to reach and to talk to parishioners that we've lived the same trials and tribulations that they have.
These people, their life is all about service. It's inspiring to me. It's inspiring to anybody who really gets to know them. Your work just begins in earnest tonight. And may God bless you wherever you go, whatever you do. For if you do it in the name of Jesus, it will bring life to you, to all who you meet, and to the entire church.
And that is all for this edition of Currents. Be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. We are also on Facebook and Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for watching and have a good night.